Greetings to all and welcome once again to the Gaming Codex, the show right to explain to you all the myriads of words and terms used to describe video games, the video games industry, and other things related to video games. Today's term is DPI in the context of the mouse and how it relates to gaming. According to the general definition, the computer industry often measures mouse sensitivity in terms of counts per inch, or CPI, commonly expressed as dots per inch, or DPI, which is the number of steps a mouse will report when it moves 1 inch. In early mice, the specification was called pulses per inch. The idea is as follows. A modern mouse uses an optical sensor to figure out how fast it is moving, and that sensor can only understand a certain amount of movement. It is basically a really crappy camera when you break it right down, and exactly how bad it is depends on its actual resolution, on its capability of discerning the density of individual points within an area or a line along which it moves. The higher the DPI on the sensor, this is very important, on the sensor, the better. It means that the mouse is more capable of understanding where it is moving, and how fine the movement is. Now, here's the problem. The DPI you're usually seeing on a mouse, that may not actually be the DPI the sensor is capable of. Even the DPI you see in the spec sheet of the sensor may not really be the DPI of the sensor, but the maximum output of the motion, if you will. What I'm basically saying is that there are two types of DPI. There is the one of the camera and the sensor, its resolution, if you will, the dots per inch it can discern, which determines if at the hardware level it is fundamentally awful when it comes to detecting proper motion, or if it's okay. Then we have the software DPI, which is the one we most will refer to when we talk about DPI. Because when we're talking about the one from the actual sensor, that's not even called DPI, it's called CPI. And this one can be as big, as gigantic, as massive as you want it to be, because for the most part you're taking the input from the sensor, you're then modifying it to add virtual pixels, to add more dots, if you will, so that when you move the mouse for an inch, it moves for more than an inch on a screen, which is useful on account of, we tend to have screens that are big nowadays in terms of pixel density, and multiple monitors too. But if the sensor itself doesn't have a good enough quality to actually, give you a proper resolution from the get-go, increasing that, multiplying it, will just make it worse at higher DPI. It'll judder, it will move around, it will not know where exactly it is. You can also do the opposite, where you lower the DPI in software so that you have more control and better precision of the mouse cursor, which is important if you're doing very fine movement that doesn't need you to be flying around both screens at the same time, and isn't as badly affected by a problematic sensor. Still is, it's just not as bad. Now, what is the popular definition of DPI? Well, that would be better accuracy. I mean, a mouse with more DPI has better accuracy. It's on the box, right? Why would they sell me a mouse with 26,000 DPI if it doesn't have better accuracy? Because it looks good on the box. That's mainly the reason why. Realistically, you don't need probably more than 2000 dpi. Well, you don't if you're running a 1080p screen. That would be kind of the maximum I would use, even in games that require a lot of quick motions like Unreal Tournament. That's kind of the best bang for your buck, at least it's been for me on a 1080p resolution. It may be different for you. And if you run multiple screens and you run games across all screens, or if you have 4K displays or 2K displays, or you have combinations of them with multiple images, then yeah, you will need to set a higher DPI of the mouse. But again, you're not changing what the sensor does, you're changing how the software interprets what the sensor reads. And it won't really give you better accuracy all around. DPI doesn't really tell you much about accuracy, especially when it's used more as a marketing gimmick. It's sort of like the contrast of the television sets where you see them have a bajillion to one and it's actually meaningless because nobody measures it the same. However, when combined with other statistics, it does sort of form a general idea of what the mouse can do. Other things are the IPS, which is not the same thing as the IPS panel. It's the inches per second, meaning how fast the mouse can actually track its own movement. That's an important statistic. An also important one is the acceleration, not to be confused with mouse acceleration and software, but exactly how quickly it can accelerate and still maintain a proper, accurate tracking of its own movement. The higher these numbers are, the better. It means you actually have good accuracy in pretty much any use case. Now, if they're all lies, that's a whole other matter. Now, what is the marketing definition of DPI? Well, that would be the higher this number is, the better the mouse. Would we lie to you? And the answer is yes, they would absolutely lie to you. You will see mice that aren't really that great but have a bajillion DPI being sold as elite gaming mice but aren't really anything special. I'm not saying that they're bad, but just because they have a high DPI they can reach doesn't mean that they're necessarily great. They can still be quite okay mice to use. I've used mice with low DPI, with high DPI, and as long as you don't use them at high DPI, they're quite usable. If they're particularly cheap mice, they will break within a few months, but up until they do die, and if you don't really need the like superb ultra mega, if you don't play StarCraft or professional CSGO, you honestly probably will not notice the difference. Because here's the big scary secret of mice and gaming. Pretty much any mouse is gonna do well in games. Sure, the ones that have better IPS, better acceleration, and the lower latency because they have a polling rate of 1000 Hz will have an advantage over the other ones, but you gotta be honest with yourself, it's gonna take you years of playing just one title and playing it well until you start noticing that those may be factors that are limiting your ability to play. Until then, pretty much any mouse will do. Personally, I like mice with many buttons because I can do a lot of things with those buttons that I couldn't do with a mouse that has infinite DPI, CPI, IPS, and everything else. So if you see a mouse that's being marketed just on the sheer amount of DPI it has, maybe try a cheaper one, because that DPI will tell you next to nothing about the mouse itself. So closes another chapter of the Gaming Codex. Come back next time when we will talk about a brand new subject. Goodbye.